In the heart of Umlazi, Durban's largest township, life on May 16, 2025, was as normal as it could be. Children played in the streets, music poured out of passing cars, and the hum of the evening was punctuated by the warm buzz of taverns opening their doors. To many, Friday nights offered a sacred ritual, a reprieve from the struggles of daily life, a moment to unwind, connect, and celebrate simply being alive. There, nestled along one of Umlazi's dusty main roads, stood a small tavern. It was modest in structure, corrugated roofing, neon lights flickering slightly above the entrance, a patched-up wooden counter inside, but it had spirit. It was where local workers came to laugh over shared drinks, lovers whispered in corners, and strangers became friends. The tavern, though simple, was a vital artery in the community's heart. On that Friday night, however, it would become the epicenter of a horror that would leave deep scars not only on the bodies of the fallen but on the collective psyche of a community long worn down by violence. The tavern was alive with sound. A local DJ played amapiano tracks, the bass thumping hard against the thin walls. Friends danced, bartenders poured drinks, and laughter spilled out onto the streets. Among the patrons were young adults, some still in their 20s, others early into their 30s, who had just gotten paid, ready to spend the evening celebrating life. But as the clock crept past 10 p.m., the energy began to shift. There were no visible signs of what was about to happen, no argument, no tension in the air, no warning. Then, the unimaginable occurred. According to witness accounts, a car pulled up swiftly outside the tavern. From it emerged several masked men, armed with automatic rifles. Within seconds, they opened fire without uttering a word. The bullets tore through the metal walls, shattered glass bottles behind the bar, and pierced through bodies with terrifying precision. Patrons screamed, ducked, and scattered, some managing to crawl to safety, others falling where they stood. By the time the gunfire stopped, 8 people lay dead. 6 men. 2 women. Some were shot in the head, others in the chest and back. Blood pooled beneath the bodies. Chairs were overturned, drinks spilled, and silence, thick, stunned silence, filled the tavern. The perpetrators, without taking anything, returned to their vehicle and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but chaos and carnage. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. By the early hours of the morning, the media had arrived, cordoning tape fluttered in the wind, and the South African Police Service began their preliminary investigation. The motive? Unknown. The suspects? Still at large. The shock? Absolute. As investigators began their work, psychologists, criminologists, and community leaders attempted to process the event. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a culmination. A moment that reflected a deeper, more systemic sickness plaguing South Africa, one rooted in inequality, trauma, and a desensitization to violence. To understand why this happened, one must step back, far back, into the broader socio-psychological landscape of modern South Africa. A nation traumatized. The psychology of South Africa, nearly 3 decades after the fall of apartheid, continues to wrestle with its demons. The legacy of systemic oppression, economic exclusion, and generational trauma remains deeply embedded in the societal fabric. For townships like Umlazi, the daily reality is marked by high unemployment, inadequate infrastructure, poor policing, and rampant violence. Growing up in such conditions wires the brain differently. Children who are repeatedly exposed to crime, violence, and instability often develop heightened survival instincts. Psychologically, the nervous system becomes hypervigilant, always on alert. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, becomes overactive. Trust becomes dangerous. Empathy, a luxury. Over time, such children can become numb to bloodshed, either as survivors or, tragically, as perpetrators. The gunmen who carried out the tavern attack were not merely criminals. They were likely products of this system, shaped by poverty, alienation, and unresolved trauma. That doesn't absolve them. But it explains the roots. Research in psychology consistently shows that unprocessed trauma, especially when combined with peer reinforcement and social disconnection, is a recipe for violence. Gang involvement, often speculated in such attacks, thrives in environments of instability. Gangs offer what the state often fails to, a sense of belonging, identity, protection, and purpose. Young men, particularly those without jobs or fathers, are prime recruits. Many gang initiations involve acts of extreme violence, not only as proof of loyalty but as a means of severing emotional inhibition. Kill, and you become numb. Do it again, and it becomes routine. In Umlazi, like many townships across South Africa, these patterns are not new. The tavern shooting simply brought them into the spotlight with brutal clarity. The victims. More than just numbers, it's easy to report. 8 people killed. But each of those individuals had names, dreams, stories. One of the victims was a 24-year-old woman named Leal. She was celebrating a friend's birthday, wearing a red dress she had saved up to buy. She had just gotten a job as a junior admin assistant in Durban Central and was looking forward to moving out of her family's RDP house. Another was Themba, a 33-year-old father of 2 who had come for just one drink before heading home. He never made it back. His daughter still waits for him every night by the gate. These were not gangsters. They were ordinary people. Some say that perhaps one of the targets was involved in criminal activity, and the rest were just collateral. But how have we reached a point where being at the wrong place, at the wrong time, means dying in a spray of bullets? Families were shattered. Mothers collapsed at the morgue. Children asked questions no parent should ever have to answer. The grief was thick, and it spilled beyond individual households. It drowned the entire community. In the days following the massacre, the community of Umlazi was enveloped in a profound sense of grief and disbelief. The tavern, once a place of camaraderie and celebration, had become a grim symbol of the violence that had abruptly claimed 8 lives. Memorials sprang up around the site, with candles flickering in the night and flowers laid in remembrance. Families of the victims gathered, seeking solace in shared mourning, their lives irrevocably altered by the tragedy. The South African Police Service, SAPS, intensified their investigation, launching a manhunt for the unknown assailants. Colonel Robert Netshiunda, a police spokesperson, confirmed that the victims, 6 men and 2 women aged between 22 and 40, were found with multiple gunshot wounds, lying in pools of blood inside the tavern. 3 additional individuals were injured and transported to local hospitals for treatment. The motive behind the attack remained unclear, but authorities considered it a targeted act of violence. As the investigation unfolded, the broader context of crime in South Africa came into focus. The nation grapples with one of the highest murder rates globally, with approximately 75 murders occurring daily. Factors such as gang violence, the proliferation of illegal firearms, and socioeconomic disparities contribute to this alarming statistic. In communities like Umlazi, these issues are exacerbated by limited access to resources, high unemployment rates, and a pervasive sense of disenfranchisement. Psychologists and sociologists have long studied the impact of such environments on individuals and communities. Chronic exposure to violence and instability can lead to desensitization, where the abnormal becomes normalized. Children growing up in these conditions may develop heightened survival instincts, often at the expense of emotional development and empathy. This cycle perpetuates itself, as trauma begets trauma, and violence becomes an accepted means of conflict resolution. In the case of the Durban Tavern shooting, the psychological ramifications extend beyond the immediate victims and their families. Survivors may experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. The community at large may grapple with collective trauma, leading to increased fear, mistrust, and social fragmentation. These psychological scars can hinder community cohesion and resilience, making recovery a daunting challenge. Efforts to address these issues require a multifaceted approach. Law enforcement agencies must be adequately resourced and trained to effectively combat crime and apprehend perpetrators. Community-based programs focused on education, mental health support, and economic empowerment are essential in breaking the cycle of violence. Moreover, fostering open dialogues about trauma and healing can help communities process their experiences and rebuild trust. As the investigation into the Durban Tavern Massacre continues, the hope remains that justice will be served, and that the tragedy will serve as a catalyst for meaningful change. The resilience of the Umlazi community, in the face of such adversity, stands as a testament to the human spirit's capacity for healing and transformation. In the aftermath of the tragic mass shooting at a tavern in Umlazi, Durban, the community grappled with profound grief and a pressing demand for justice. The incident, which claimed the lives of 8 individuals, 6 men and 2 women aged between 22 and 40, left an indelible mark on the township. As the South African Police Service, SAPS, launched a manhunt for the unknown assailants, the broader implications of the attack reverberated throughout the nation. The victims, found lying in pools of blood with multiple gunshot wounds, were ordinary citizens whose lives were abruptly and violently ended. Their deaths underscored the pervasive issue of gun violence in South Africa, a country grappling with one of the highest murder rates globally. According to police data, approximately 75 murders occur daily in the nation, highlighting the urgent need for comprehensive strategies to address this crisis. The psychological impact of such violence extends beyond the immediate victims and their families. Survivors and community members often experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of insecurity. The normalization of violence can lead to desensitization, where repeated exposure diminishes emotional responses, further entrenching cycles of aggression and fear. In Umlazi, the community's resilience was tested as residents sought to reclaim their sense of safety and normalcy. Local leaders and organizations mobilized to provide support to the bereaved families, offering counseling services and organizing vigils to honor the deceased. These efforts aimed to foster communal healing and solidarity in the face of tragedy. The incident also prompted national discourse on the proliferation of illegal firearms and the effectiveness of law enforcement. Calls for stricter gun control measures and improved policing strategies gained momentum, emphasizing the need for systemic reforms to curb violence. Moreover, the massacre highlighted the importance of addressing underlying socio-economic factors, such as poverty, unemployment, and lack of education, that contribute to crime and instability. As the investigation into the Umlazi Tavern shooting continues, the community remains steadfast in its pursuit of justice and peace. The tragedy serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the imperative for collective action to build a safer, more equitable society. The massacre at the Durban Tavern was more than just another crime statistic. It was a brutal reminder of the human cost of unchecked violence, inequality, and systemic neglect. As the final gunshots echoed into the night and the dust settled, the echoes of pain and disbelief began to rise in their place. What remained was a community brought to its knees, searching for answers, struggling to piece together a normalcy that had been violently shattered. But even in tragedy, there is a deeper truth to be told, a truth about a society hanging by threads, where the weight of unresolved trauma, socio-economic despair, and institutional failure creates a fertile ground for such unspeakable horrors. The tavern, once a local symbol of escape and social refuge, became the crime scene of a nation's sorrow. A canvas stained with the cruelty of those who see life as disposable and violence as power. From a psychological perspective, the trauma experienced by survivors and witnesses is profound. The survivors didn't just lose friends or loved ones. They lost a sense of safety, their assumptions about what it means to gather in public, and perhaps even their trust in the very systems meant to protect them. Many will walk forward with invisible wounds, intrusive thoughts, sleepless nights, hypervigilance, and a gnawing anxiety that the worst could happen again at any moment. Communities like Umlazi are all too familiar with the trauma that accumulates when grief becomes a recurring theme, when funerals outnumber celebrations. This continuous traumatic stress means residents often live in a perpetual state of fear, unsure of when violence will strike again. This stress doesn't just affect mental health, it seeps into parenting, relationships, learning environments, and the development of children who grow up seeing violence not as an exception, but as a norm. And then there is the deeper question: what makes someone pull the trigger without remorse? What drives human beings to such levels of calculated brutality? While we don't yet know the full motives behind this particular massacre, whether it was gang-related, retaliatory, or indiscriminate, there's no denying the pattern that has emerged. A pattern where human life is cheapened by the desperation of poverty, hardened by exposure to chronic violence, and numbed by a culture where weapons are easier to come by than hope. Perpetrators of such crimes are often products of their environment, where unresolved trauma, fractured family structures, poor education, unemployment, and a lack of social support converge to create individuals who are angry, disillusioned, and emotionally detached. Their actions may seem monstrous, and indeed they are, but behind the mask of cruelty often lies a lifetime of abandonment, psychological damage, and pain transformed into aggression. Yet, none of this justifies the bloodshed. Instead, it compels us to think systemically. What are we, as a society, doing to break these cycles? What are we doing to stop the ripple effect that trauma creates? When people lose faith in law enforcement and justice, when public spaces turn into killing fields, when mourning becomes a communal routine, something has fundamentally broken. In the wake of the massacre, authorities promised justice. But justice must be more than arrests. Justice must be about restoring dignity to the living, healing the wounded, and protecting those who remain. It means empowering communities with real resources, mental health support, youth programs, educational access, job creation, and a police service that is not only reactive but trusted and proactive. The community of Umlazi, like many others across South Africa, deserves more than sympathy. They deserve real, lasting change. For the families of the victims, no words will ever undo the loss. No court sentence will return their loved ones. But their pain must not be in vain. Their names must not be forgotten. Let them serve as a haunting reminder of what happens when society turns a blind eye for too long. In memory of the 8 souls lost that night, let their stories stir something deeper in us, an urgency, a responsibility, a reckoning. Because until we address the roots of violence, we will only keep treating the symptoms while the disease grows stronger. Let us remember their names. Let us mourn them with meaning. And let us build a world where taverns can once again be places of laughter, not bloodshed.